Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Parmer. I am here in sunny, cold, snowy Montreal at Plotly headquarters. And I'm going to talk today about creating your own Dash components with React.js. So I've been working on Dash for several years now, but Dash has only been open sourced for the last year and a half. And a really important part of what makes Dash so unique and so special is how it interfaces with JavaScript. So if you're not too familiar with Dash, Dash is a Python framework that connects directly to, that enables you to build web applications without writing any JavaScript. And there's a bit of magic that happens in order to make this possible. And today I'll be explaining a little bit about how this works, about how this interface from Python to JavaScript works, and how the interface from components in React.js and JavaScript are connected to the Python ecosystem. So all of the content that I'm going to be talking about today is all published online. So I'll share my screen and I'll just show you some resources that we're going to be going through today. So if you go to just dash.plot.ly, this is the central user guide for everything about Dash. So this is the user guide that you should reference when you're just learning Dash, when you're referencing different component libraries, but also if you want to make your own components. So there's a section down here called creating your own components, and we'll be going through some of these chapters today. So if you have never written any JavaScript before, or if you've never used React before, but you're comfortable in Python, we've written this really comprehensive guide for developers just like you. And this is the same guide that we use internally at Plotly to teach Python developers how to write JavaScript. So this guide talks about everything about the JavaScript ecosystem, what React is and how to install things, and goes through step-by-step how to make a component. And we'll be going through bits and pieces of this today. The other part of these guides is this build your own components section. And in here, we link to this project on GitHub called the Dash Component Boilerplate. And this is where you'll start if you're writing your own component. And this is what we'll go over mostly today. The final part in these set of tutorials is some more advanced guides about working with D3.js and Dash. So React.js is a JavaScript library for writing user interfaces, and it was written and maintained by Facebook, and it's really popular. And its popularity is one of the reasons why we use it in Dash. If you just Google React, say color picker, chances are somebody in the community has made a really nice color picker. And in fact, we can click on this and we can see these really nice color pickers. So React has been really successful in the front-end world. And there's this huge community of developers that have made these self-contained components, like in this case, a color picker. So we decided to build Dash on top of React so that this huge ecosystem of components, like color pickers and tables and drop-downs and graphs, could be really easily accessible and portable into Dash. So another really popular library in JavaScript is D3.js. And D3 is a library that is really common for making, for doing data visualization. And so in order to port D3 into React, there's just a few things that you need to know, and it's a kind of a more advanced topic that we won't necessarily go into today. But if that's something that you're interested in, then we've written a chapter and several tutorials just on that topic. So in Dash, we use a few different component libraries. We've got our core components, our HTML components. We published advanced data table this fall, and we just recently open sourced some components for data acquisition called -DAC. All of these component libraries that we maintain at Plotly use the same toolkit for generating components that you could use. So Dash is a very modular system where the core libraries of Dash don't actually include, Dash.py doesn't actually include any component libraries of itself. You install all the component libraries yourself. It just happens that, in most cases, you're going to be installing the ones that Plotly maintains, mainly these set of 2 or 3 component libraries here. But the same tooling that we use to create these components, to convert these components from React into Dash compatible components, are the same ones that you can use, and that's what we'll be going over today. So in addition to the component libraries we maintain, many people in the community have published their own component libraries. And there's a few different ways to find this. First, inside the community forum, there's a show and tell thread. And in here, we have a collection of different apps that people in the community have made, as well as different component libraries that community members have published. So if you scroll down through here and go down to Dash components, here are some examples of components that community members have made. And this was really the goal of Dash, and the reason why we chose React, and the reason why we decided to make components a very modular system of Dash, so that Plotly wouldn't be responsible for creating all the components. If you have an idea of a component that might be very domain specific, say like this particular component, which is this wrapper around PyLDA viz, and you have full control over creating this component yourself. You don't have to fork it in or create a fork of our own components and merge them in. You can create your own component library and publish it and share it with the community. So this show and tell thread in the community forum is the best resource for checking out other component libraries that community members have made. And just searching show and tell will show a lot of different topics that that community members have created, either to show off their applications or to show off components that they've made. So I highly recommend checking out the community forum for seeing more components and applications that community members have made. So today what we're going to do is we're going to start out by visiting this user guide at dash.plots.ly, clicking on this build your own components link, and in here visiting this GitHub link, the Dash component boilerplate. And we're just going to go over a few steps and create a really simple component. So inside this Dash component boilerplate, there is a set of instructions, and we're just going to follow these verbatim right now. So you'll need to install Cookie Cutter, which is a library that is used to initialize projects, and then virtual environment. So I've already installed these, and now I'll paste this Cookie Cutter command into my terminal. So in here, I'll paste this in. And what this is going to do is it's going to download the GitHub repository, and it's going to ask me a series of questions that, and the answers to these questions are going to be sort of templated into the project that it creates. So I'm just going to call these like webinar components. So this project name would be, for example, Dash core components or Dash HTML components, or if you wanted to create video elements, it might be Dash video elements. But for now, I'm just going to call it webinar. And that's going to be the same name that'll be used when I import the package, so import webinar. And a component library can contain multiple components or can contain just a single component. So the first component that I create, I'm just going to call it example component. And you can change this after the fact really easily. And my name is Chris. You can always reach out to me at chris.watts.y. Description is going to be a simple set of components created for the Dash webinar. And we'll MIT license this, and we'll publish it. We'll install these dependencies. And so what this is doing is it's going to download the boilerplate from GitHub. It's going to template in the answers to these questions into the project. It's going to install the necessary Python dependencies as well as the necessary JavaScript dependencies. And it'll create this folder that is ready for us to start working on our components. So this folder is going to contain a lot of different things. It's going to contain sample JavaScript that we'll use to get started. It'll contain a README. It'll contain a checklist for you. Basically, if you look at all the things that might be in, like, say, the Dash core components repo, this is an example of what will be created by this component boilerplate script. So there's going to be JavaScript code in here. There's going to be all these git ignore files. And all this boilerplate code and file and project structure is going to be created for you automatically. So once it's created, there's be this folder called webinar. And let's just take a look at what's inside this folder. So inside this folder, the source code for all of our components is going to be in this src file, inside src, lib, and then inside components. And in here, there's this file called example components.react.js. And this is a very simple component that is automatically included when you create your component boilerplate. So this is kind of like your getting started component that you'll work off of. You'll also see in here that there's this tests folder. So in here, we've got an example of how to write a test for your component, and it's templated in so that it works with the component that you've created. There is a file called usage.py. And this is an example Dash application that uses this, uses the component library that you've initialized. So you can see at the top here, there's this import webinar. So this is the name of the project that we just created. And you can see in our app layout, there's webinar.example component. So example component here is the name of our component, which matches the same name of our React component. So Dash components in JavaScript are written in React, which is a user interface library maintained by Facebook. And this is what the React code looks like. So the first thing that you'll notice is that there are these comments at the top, and this is like the standard docstring format in JavaScript. And so one of the really cool things about writing components for Dash is that you don't actually need to write any Python at all. You can write your component, you'll write your component entirely in React with JavaScript, and the Dash toolchain will create an interface for this component automatically from this source code file, and it'll generate a Python file for you. So if we just say, like, open up our Python terminal, and we do, import webinar, and then we call help on webinar.example component. And you can see that there's this docstring here in Python. And this docstring here matches the docstring that is in, that's in our React file. So these doc strings that we write in React are going to be the same ones that are going to be used when the Python component is auto-generated. So if we look at this Python interface, there's a few different keyword arguments. There's ID, label, value, and they've got their own types like string, and each of them have their own descriptions. So if we look back at our React file and scroll down, there's this declaration at the bottom that's called prop types, and this is like the description of the input arguments of the component. So inside these prop types, we can see that there's an ID, there's a label, and a value. And for each of these properties, there's a comment above that describes this property. And so when Dash's toolchain generates the Python components, it looks for this declaration. And this declaration is like really standard in React. It's called the React prop types. And it'll look for this and it'll parse this file and it will extract these keyword arguments and it'll use this to create the Python file. So then the Python interface is just a simple interface that's going to have these three arguments as input arguments: ID, label, and value. And so if we look at our usage.py file, you can see that there's this, we're calling this this class from our webinar component library with these three arguments. So you might be wondering like where this import webinar, what this is actually importing. And you can find that in this project as well. There's going to be this folder here called webinar. And everything inside this folder is auto-generated. So inside this folder, you can see that there's example component.py. And if you open this up, you'll see the source code for this component. But as it says at the top, it's auto-generated. So you won't actually edit this component, but the Dash's React to Python toolchain is able to auto-generate this file entirely from your React file. So this is all auto-generated. So this is the really great thing about writing components for Dash, is that you don't need to be writing two interfaces. If you change the input arguments in your JavaScript side, you don't need to manually copy those arguments over to the Python side. If you're writing comments in the JavaScript side, they'll get converted into doc strings in the Python side. When you're writing your components, you're working purely in JavaScript, and the rest of the interface is taken care for you automatically, as long as you stay within the conventions that, that Dash and React have provided. So let's look a little bit, let's run usage.py and just see what this component looks like. So again, this file that we're going to be running is auto-generated, and it's contained. It's provided for you just from the component boilerplate. So I haven't actually written any code yet. I've just cloned and initialized my component library. So if we run Python usage.py, this is a standard Dash application. So we've got a Dash app. We've got our component embedded inside the layout, and then we're running it below. There's a callback as well. So we'll open up this URL in our web browser as usual. And we have something really simple. It says example component. There's a little input box. If I type into the input box, it's updating this output. So let's compare this application with our usage.py file. So you can see in here, here's the app layout. Here's the webinar component, and then here's the output. And so this component here is rendering this top part. It's rendering this label and this input. And then here's this output div, which is getting populated from the input, and it's updating this text here. So let's look at the React code, which is what will render what's rendering this text label and this text input. So inside our React code, there is this function called render, and this is a standard function in React components. And whatever is returned from this function is what's going to get rendered up here. And so in here, we've got this markup that looks sort of like HTML. It's called JSX. And it's kind of React's markup language for writing markup inside JavaScript. So let's just change this from a div to an H1. And then let's just change some of this text a little bit. So once I've made a change in my React file, it needs to be sort of like compiled before it can be run. And so there's a script that you'll run in order to like compile this JavaScript, and this script is run with npm. And npm is like JavaScript's package manager, so it's sort of similar to pip, but it's also used for things like running scripts inside package. So inside the folder, we'll run npm run build all. And what this is going to do is it's going to compile my JavaScript, and it's also going to auto-generate the Python components based off of this JavaScript file. So this script name here, build all, this is a script that we've defined inside this package. And you can see where all of the scripts are defined inside this file package.json. Package.json is sort of similar to it's sort of like a requirements.txt combined with a setup.py. It contains things like which packages are needed. It also contains things about the package itself, like the name and the version. And then there's this script section here, which defines just like aliases that are used inside this project to run a set of commands. So we ran the build all alias, which is going to run a set of other commands like building the JavaScript and then building the Python code. So if you want to dig in to see like what these scripts are actually doing, you can open up package.json and you can look at these aliases and you can see the underlying commands that are being run. So this will take me about 30 seconds or so before it compiles, and then we'll run our Python code again. And this, when we load up this page, it should load the new JavaScript bundle that we just compiled. And we should see an updated version of our component. And indeed, here this text is bigger because it's being rendered with an H1. That's something that we changed. And we changed the text inside here. So whatever's returned inside this render function is what's going to get rendered inside our application. Now there's this other part to this component that's unique, which is a way for this component's input to communicate with Dash. So in our application, we have this callback, and this callback is listening to the value property of this component. And this value property is what gets rendered inside this input, and we initialize it here to my value. But I could change this to sample initial value. And if I change this, we'll see it updated in the text input when we reload the screen. So callbacks listen to different properties of components. And when those properties change, usually through user interaction, like editing an input box, then our callbacks will get fired with that new properties value. So in this case, we are listening to the value property of this component, and our callback is updating the children property of this output component. And we're just concatenating the string and returning it. So as I edit this input box, the value of its input is getting passed into Python, into my callback, or it's getting concatenated and it's getting returned and re-rendered in the front end. So what that means is that if you think about this from the component's perspective, there needs to be a way for the component itself to sort of tell Dash that one of its properties has changed. That way, Dash can itself tell you, the application developer, that the property has changed and pass it into this function. So when we write components, the way that we will inform Dash that one of the properties has changed is by calling this special property setProps, which stands for set property. And so what this is doing is when we call this function, we'll call it with the new input argument of this particular text input. So this object here is sort of like a Python dictionary. This is the key and this is the value. And when we call this function, we're saying, hey, Dash, the value property of this component, it's changed. And the new value of this component is whatever e.target.value gets evaluated to. e.target.value here is just sort of a standard HTML and JavaScript syntax for accessing the current value of a text input. And we're calling setProps inside this function here. And this function is getting called anytime that this input changes. So we're assigning this function to the onChange property of this input. In this onChange property of this input, this is just sort of standard React.js code. Inputs will have an onChange property and they will get called with a new event. And that event is going to contain an object called target.value, which will have the new value of the input. So as I type into this input box here, this function is getting called. It's getting called with the new value of the input. Our component is informing Dash that this property has changed by calling setProps. setProps is this sort of magical function that gets passed in as an input value to your component by Dash. So Dash is going to pass in this special setProps function to your component. And that's just sort of part of the Dash contract. So that's like the whole life cycle of these components. When the application is initialized, whatever property values we've set in our Python code, they're going to get passed up to the JavaScript front end in the web browser. The web browser is going to pass those values into the component. The component is going to render some markup with those values like ID and label and value. And then if there's anything if there's any of these properties that change through user interaction, then you need to tell Dash that those properties have changed, and you do that by calling setProps with the new value of the property. So there is a question that was just asked, which is, does auto-generating Python module happen each time the React component is saved during dev, or does it need to be regenerated? It needs to be regenerated. And this will happen, this happens manually by calling that npm run build all script. That will both compile the JavaScript and it will regenerate the auto-generated Python files. So let's just do a quick extension of this component, and let's just add a color picker to it. So earlier we Googled React color picker, and we were lucky in that somebody in the React community has already written a color picker that we can use. So this is a really cool component. It comes with all these different color pickers that are inspired by different software out there like Photoshop and Sketch or GitHub. And usually when you visit a component package, there'll be a couple instructions. The first one is usually going to be how to install it. So this is similar to pip install, but this is for installing JavaScript files. So we'll run npm install React color, and this will install the JavaScript file inside this package. It'll also add it to package.json. You can see got added here, React color. So this is just to list the dependencies, kind of similar to requirements.txt. And then we'll see here some sample code. So we're just going to pull some of these lines of code from this sample block and include it in our example component. So we're going to import sketch picker from React color. So this is the package, and this is an element inside the package. So really similar to Python, except that, the syntax is a little bit different. And then inside here, we're going to keep the rest of the markup, and we're going to just include a color picker here. So this color picker doesn't have any arguments right now. We're just going to include it, and then we're going to regenerate our bundle, and we're going to see it update. So since I've modified some of the JavaScript, I'm going to run npm run build all, which is going to recompile everything for me. So after we see this rendered, then we'll wire up the color input to it so that we can write callbacks that get updated when the color gets changed. So we'll just wait for this to finish. So this is the first step. It's building the JavaScript file. You can see where these files get generated inside the name of your package folder. Inside webinar dev and webinar min, these are the JavaScript files that are generated for you. And now that this is finished, I'll rerun the sample file. Reload the application, and now we'll see our color picker. And so we can wire this up with the backend by doing a similar on-change handler for the sketch for the color picker by copying code very similar to what's included here. So on-change complete. On-change complete is what will get called when this changes. This will get called with a new color, so we'll call set props. Color. And by doing this, it'll inform Dash when the color has changed. And then if we want to pass in, allow the user to pass in a color, we'll add this to one of our properties. That gets passed in from Dash, as well as one of the properties that is annotated below. And then what we'll be able to do here is pass in something like color is equal to red, which will update the color on page load, and we'll be able to write a callback like app.callback, updates the output style whenever the input color changes. And then return a new style. So that's sort of in a nutshell how you would install an npm package for that contains another component and include it in your own Dash compatible component. So if you want to learn more, I encourage you to check out the resources that we have on our Dash user guide. especially if you're new to Python, especially the React, or if you're new to React, especially the React for Python devs tutorial. And then also feel free to ask questions in the community forum, and check out the open source GitHub repositories that contain the other components. So we're a few minutes late, so we gotta wrap this up. But if you have any questions, feel free to open up an issue in the GitHub repositories or in the community forum, and any of us on the team can help you from there. Before we close up, are there any last minute questions? Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see you either in the community forum or on GitHub. Good luck.